Hello, everyone say hi recording. We are being recorded live from 14 different points in Mexico City. What? Technology, you guys. So, in the past few classes, what have we been talking about? Santiago, turn on your camera, please.
Independence of Mexico.
We talked about Mexico, yes. Mexico how, Mexico where, what about Mexico? Mexican food, Mexican actresses, Mexican what?
Liberalism and conservatism.
So, well, that was last class.
State building.
That was on Monday, right? So we've been talking about Mexican state building, right? That encompasses all of the discussions. On the first class about Mexico, which was last Friday, we talked about the independence of Mexico, correct? Well, before talking about the independence of Mexico, we talked about we debated the question: when was Mexico invented, and what did we come up with?
There's no specific point.
There's no specific answer. There's a bunch of different dates that maybe could apply, but we couldn't really agree on any of them. Mostly because it seems like when you focus on each one, there's some elements of what Mexico is right now, but there isn't one date where you're like, that's Mexico, right? Specifically, we read the Declaration of Independence of Mexico, and what was our response to it? Did it happen like with the Declaration of Independence of the United States, where you're like, well, yeah, there you go, United States, that's what it is? What happened with the Declaration of Independence of Mexico?
It was very conservative.
It was very conservative, and the characteristics of the society you read about in it, you're like, what is going on, right? So it's like the Mexican Empire, there's a monarchy, there's a bishop and a viceroy signing the declaration. It literally says society is not equal because one person is super amazing and our hero, and it's Agustin Iturbide who is writing the document. Did Janet fall asleep? Because her image is frozen in a suspicious way. Either she's asleep or she's ignoring us. But anyway, as I was saying, we saw that there's a very important element of conservatism in the way Mexico declared its independence that is still present nowadays, right? We still have issues with equality. We still have issues with freedom. We still have issues with religion. But later on Monday, we talked about the impact of liberalism in what Mexico is, right? Right? Yes? Anyone? No? Yes? Hello? Fernanda, you're raising your hand?
What?
No.
Oh, okay. So we talked about liberalism, correct? Anyone? Bueller, are you ignoring me?
What is the question?
Did we talk about liberalism? Yes or no? Justify your answer.
Liberalism in what?
In Mexico, the impact of liberalism.
Yes, you kind of, we use it to compare both of them.
Both of what?
With the
Of liberalism and conservatism. So we kind of talk about.
Okay, yeah. So we talked about different aspects of conservatism and liberalism that shaped Mexican state building, right? Now, we mentioned the War of Reform, la Guerra de Reforma, and we talked about how we usually learn about this as a conflict between Benito Juarez and Maximiliano de Habsburgo. But the thing is, their conflict was not about ideas, because they were both liberals. It was not about the way they were supposed to govern, because they were both kind of agreeing on that. They agreed that the Constitution was not very useful, that they had to, if they were the executive power, they had to execute. but they did disagree on who was going to be in charge, right? Now, my dad, I was talking about this with my dad yesterday, and he gave me a very good way of explaining it. He said, La Guerra de Reforma is like when two people have a crush on the same person. They both agree that the other person is amazing. They both agree that they want to date them, but they disagree about who's the one to do it, right? So kind of like that. Now, if the War of Reform was not the main moment where we see liberalism become important for Mexico, we talked about how it was a little before, right? About 5 years earlier with La Revolución de Ayutla, which the liberals win, and they institute the Constitution of 1857. But the thing is, what was the problem with this constitution?
It was too liberal.
It's too liberal, and why is this a problem? You would think that liberals would like having a very liberal constitution, right?
But people wouldn't take it seriously.
Why would they not take it seriously?
They will feel free to do everything.
Well, kind of. So the issue is, did we talk about this, about how liberalism assumes two things about people? Number one, that they are trustworthy, and number two, that they will trust others to do what they're told. Right? So is everyone trustworthy?
No.
Not really, right? We know that, especially in a place with an individual perspective, even without it, we know some people are not trustworthy, right? Some people are dishonest, or some people are incompetent. Other people are lazy or ambitious or whatever, right? Now, extreme liberalism, like we see it in the 19th century, kind of ignores these aspects. Liberalism nowadays kind of agrees that, yeah, you have to take those things into account, right? So, but we're still in a phase where people are thinking of liberalism like, no, we can assume the best in people. But it wasn't working because a lot of people were ambitious and not doing what they were told. So we see a very specific opposition to this liberal regime, right? Who are these people that are opposing liberalism?
The conservatives.
Yes, conservatives. Now, this kind of summarizes what we've been talking about. Mexico in the 19th century, after 1810-ish to about 1860-ish. So about 50 years are summarized here. But there's one other thing we always learn about when we learn about this time period in primaria and secundaria. One other thing that shaped Mexico in the 19th century, which we learn about in very nationalist terms, where it's like, Mexico is the victim and we fought for our freedom because we are Mexican. Anyone know what I'm talking about?
La Revolución o el Porfiriato?
Before that. Think Cinco de Mayo, Batalla de Puebla.
La intervención francesa.
Las intervenciones.
Niños héroes. Yeah, interventions, right? We learn about how foreign countries... voy a estornudar. Espera un momento. Sorry about that. So we learned about how foreign countries were intervening in Mexico, and that is bad, right? So what is the usual narrative we get about this? What do these countries want? Why would they invade Mexico? What's going on?
Some invented situations where they owed them.
Invented situations? What?
Well, they searched for situations to claim they had something against.
So we are told that they did this under false pretenses, right? But what are these false pretenses?
Mexico owed money?
Mexico owed them money, right? Which was not false. That was extremely true. We will talk about that in a minute. What else? Now, well, what were they trying to do? Like, why were they invading? What was the objective here? What was the cause? What's going on? Because the thing is, no country invades another country without a cause, right? They have maybe not a reason, right? Maybe it's not entirely rational, but they have a cause. They're doing it because of something.
I think that with France it had something to do with cake war or something.
The Guerra de los Pasteles. That's one of the. That's the first French intervention. Yes.
Yes, like I remember that Mexico owed money, and then they kind of pardoned us, like that, like we can wait a couple of more years for you to pay us, and then I think that happened, and they came to attack.
But if it's about money and there was a pardon, why would France invade Mexico with an army?
That's why I also.
What?
They try to reconquer Mexico.
But the thing is, if that's a common viewpoint, a common answer to this, if they were trying to conquer Mexico, well, first of all, why would they conquer Mexico? Mexico was super weak, super poor, kind of a conflict point with Spain, and no one wanted to fight Spain because Spain was so conflictive, right? So why would they want to conquer Mexico? And second of all, if they were conquering Mexico, why would they only take Veracruz, Puebla, and Mexico City? Doesn't really make a lot of strategic sense.
They were the richest part of the country.
So that's a very important detail. The thing is, if you're conquering, the first thing you take is the capital and the borders. You're supposed to defend the borders if you're conquering. But clearly, if the motivation is to look for places with money, you maybe are not conquering, right?
Stealing then?
Stealing?
Expand territory.
No, but that's what I'm saying. If you're trying to conquer and expand territory, the first thing you secure are the borders. You go to Texas, you go to Guatemala, and you're like, whoever is on the other side, this part is French now, right? That's conquering. They were clearly not doing that. But Elias brings up the issue of money, right? They were going to places with money. And maybe not necessarily places with money, but places that did trade, international trade to be specific, and places where taxes were paid. What? Wait, we have a chat. Santiago says, because Mexico had a weak army and government and European countries took the chance. But the chance for what? Because the thing is, this is a very common answer as well. They say they tried to conquer Mexico because Mexico was weak. But the issue is you don't really want to conquer weak places because then you have to take care of them. You have to be the one to defend them. That's expensive. Right? Do you see a lot of countries invading weak countries nowadays, like Guatemala? It's really weak. They still don't do it. So, anyone have any ideas? Yes, to force Mexico into paying. Thank you, Santiago. Literally the reason they did it. So the issue here is they were not conquering Mexico because they literally did the opposite of conquering Mexico. They only took some specific tiny places. They were not taking advantage of Mexico's weakness because the issue is to take advantage of someone else's weakness, they need to have something where they are not weak. And neither France nor the United States were doing that. France for economic reasons, the United States for racist reasons. But what they were trying to do was get their money back. Now, I am going to read to you. Fun fact, when I was in licenciatura, one of my servicios sociales was to be a cuentacuentos in Xochimilco. So, is anyone familiar with this book? Historia General de México? Colegio de México? No? No one? Seriously? It's a very common book to have in houses for people who really like history, which happens. Some people really like history, or if someone in that house studied anything related to social science or humanities, like if your parents or your siblings or whatever are abogados or economistas or RIs or historiadores or whatever, and they studied in Mexico University, they generally have this book. Now, the thing with this book is it's called Historia General de México because it is a very direct title. It's a very general history of Mexico. It doesn't go into a lot of details. It's also from a generation of writers that are very cuadraditos. So what does cuadradito mean? When someone says, Shanata es bien cuadradita. What does it mean?
That they don't take others' opinion or maybe other points of view?
Not necessarily. I mean, yeah, it means they have a very firm opinion, but it also means they say things in a very structured way, right? There is no room for creativity. There's no room for entertainment. There is no room for details, right? They try to be very, very extremely clear to the point of, and I'm not saying this book is super boring, but to the point of being super boring. So, yeah. I'm gonna read to you a few paragraphs, and then we're gonna discuss the economic implications of the 19th century in Mexico. Ready? Like Alaska says, are you ready? Are you ready? So I'm gonna read part of a subchapter called Una economía en bancarrota from the chapter titled Los primeros tropiezos, which is about the years after Mexico's independence. Super uplifting titles, right? Everyone ready? So, aunque la consumación de la independencia despertó un gran optimismo y los mexicanos confiaban en recobrar la grandeza novohispana, el nuevo estado se estrenaba sobre bases endebles. So, la grandeza novohispana it's talking about is how in colonial times there were two economic booms. Number one, when the Spanish arrived to Mexico and discovered mostly the mining resources, specifically silver. And this is around the early 1600s. And later on in the late 1700s, when the Reformas Borbónicas kind of fix the tax structure and make sure that the money from Nueva España can make it to Spain, right? So in this case, after independence, people were kind of yearning for the economic situation of the time when their grandparents were adults. So this is 1830-ish. They're looking back to the 1780s, kind of. So it's like, the Reformas Borbónicas are a long time ago, but not that long for them, right? So it's like when people right now say, los 1960s, estaba bien padre, right? Like that. Now, se había desvertebrado la economía y la pérdida de la mitad de la fuerza de trabajo en la lucha por la independencia afectaba a todas sus ramas. Aunque la deuda heredada de 76 millones de pesos se redujo después de reducir partidas dudosas a 45 millones, la bancarrota era real. Por otra parte, la rebaja de impuestos y la desorganización de los cobros impidieron obtener los recursos que requería el funcionamiento del Estado, que debía gastar además en defenderse de su exmetrópoli. Who's Mexico's exmetrópoli?
España.
Spain, correct. So the thing is, when you're a country that declares independence, you are kind of stuck with an ex that is more powerful than you for the rest of your existence. So the ex-metropoli is always going to be there. There's always going to be history. It's always going to be awkward, but you kind of have to work through it. It's like being divorced, right? Now, de esa manera, el problema hacendario iba a ser el escollo contra el cual se estrellarían todos los gobiernos, monarquista, republicano, federalista y centralista, y aún la dictadura. ¿Cuál es el problema hacendario?
¿De las tierras, el reparto?
Nope. I can see how you would make that connection, but nope. What does Secretaría de Hacienda do?
Cobre impuestos.
Taxes, right? The issue of taxes, how to charge taxes and how to decide how to spend them. Now, el choque con una realidad económica adversa influyó en la formulación de dos proyectos ideológicos que postulaban soluciones que dividirían profundamente a la nación. Un grupo que se iría identificando como liberal heredaría el convencimiento Borbón de que la solución hacendaria estaba en desamortizar los bienes del clero, tanto para que aliviara el peso de la deuda pública como para que la circulación del capital sentara las bases de una economía dinámica. What does the phrase desamortizar los bienes del clero mean?
Take the power away from the church?
Power?
Well, money.
Well, maybe their properties.
Specifically
and
money. To take money away from the church. In the shape of property maybe, but mostly money. Right? Now, the thing here is, who here has heard this proposal before? Like, the church is so rich, if they gave all their money to Africa or to whatever, everything would be so much better. Anyone heard this before? Now, why don't they do it? If it would be so easy and there's so much money in the Vatican or in whatever church you find, why don't they just give it away? Anyone know the answer? Well, the answer now, and what? Yeah, what? Tell me.
Maybe if they lose money, they lose power.
Yeah, well, partly. The issue is right now, and mostly right now, but back then still applied. On one hand, they need money to exist. They need money to manage, right? So they can't give it all away. On the other hand, the church doesn't have that much money. Like, even right now, what they have in the Vatican is mostly not that valuable. And what they do have that is valuable is actually on loan from Italy. So the church doesn't have that much money. It's a kind of an excuse to blame the church, to say that they have so much money and they're not giving it away. This is so awful, right? It's liberals trying to find someone to blame, right? Now, where was I? Otro grupo más conservador iba a considerar anatema tocar los bienes de la iglesia y favorecería la centralización, el proteccionismo y los impuestos directos. So the thing here is, from a liberal perspective, conservatives are against taking the money away from the church, and liberals are like, well, yeah, obviously they're not going to like that because they are in line with the church. They are doing whatever the church says. However, from a conservative viewpoint, you're not really, it's not a good idea to take money away from the church because they don't have that much money. It's not a useful proposal. The conservatives, in this case, they suggest restructuring taxes and making sure that people pay a lot of taxes, specifically for imports. Right? Any questions? Anyone super confused? Anyone lost? Anyone? No? Sabina, are you lost? Are you confused? Are you sure? The moment I say, okay, let's move on, Sabina's gonna be like, wait, no. I'm waiting. Not today? Wow. Oh, okay, pues. Not today, Satan, not today. Now, the thing here is, we're talking about a time in history when in Europe and in the north of the United States, we have industrialization and capitalism. Like John Green says, industrialization and capitalism, their connection gets complicated very quickly. But for our purposes, we have the situation where industry becomes more efficient and more effective through machines. That's industrialization. But in order for that to happen, it relies on a social dynamic called capitalism, where people are encouraged to find work where they are paid. Yeah? So industrialization needs capitalism because, well, in this context, right, 19th century, it needs capitalism because it needs people that are willing to leave any social status they have and just go work in factories. Yeah? Similarly, capitalism needs industrialization because people are not gonna agree to take a job like this if there are no jobs available, right? They're not gonna be like, well, I'm just gonna leave my security and my social status and just working the land for no possibilities, right? Now, do we see this situation in Mexico? No? Any idea? Now, I'm going to read a couple more paragraphs to you. They're pretty short, and then we'll discuss. the economics. Now, la industrialización fue el sueño de algunos visionarios que lucharon contra múltiples obstáculos. Aquellos que viajaron por Estados Unidos y Europa apreciaron la revolución que significaba la máquina del vapor y se contagiaron del entusiasmo de promover su uso en México o de convertirse en industriales. El primer ministro mexicano en Estados Unidos, Manuel Sosaya, a su regreso trajo consigo el equipo necesario para fabricar papel y obtuvo 7 años de exención de impuestos y al gobierno como cliente. Al igual que el comercio, los malos caminos, la onerosa arriería como medio de transporte y la inseguridad pesaron sobre la agricultura. Los hacendados se vieron obligados a organizar su propia defensa, mediante piquetes de rancheros contra indios salvajes en el norte o contra asaltantes en otras regiones. Los bandidos trataban con consideración a los propietarios que les entregaban dinero a cambio de dejarlos en paz. Los departamentos organizaron compañías de caballería, consagradas a proteger la seguridad de los caminos y poblaciones. So, we've talked about the Industrial Revolution, right? We've talked about novels like North and South, where we see how industrialization is impacting society in Great Britain. And does that sound anything like what we are seeing right now in Mexico? I mean, not right now, I mean in what I just read. Do we see middle-class people arguing with people from a different social status like, no, industrialization is what we need, it's a benefit for society? Do we? Is industrialization happening from what I read?
No, because they always stayed in one place and in the same job.
Yeah, and also it's described as el sueño de algunos visionarios. So if something is el sueño de algunos visionarios, it's clearly not happening, right? It's like they want it to happen, but it's not really happening. Now, the reason for it not happening is very clear in the example of Manuel Sosaya, what I just read. That example is very important because it talks about how he had the advantage of working in the United States as Mexico's ambassador. When he comes back, he brings equipment to have a paper factory. And in order to do it, to install his paper factory, he is given 7 years without paying taxes, and the entire government is a client. Now, does this create any incentives for other people to make their own paper companies? Why not? Amy, yeah. Why not? Anyone? ¿Por qué dicen que no y luego nada?
Because it wasn't like a person from the middle class, the one who did it. It was like someone who had already a power status.
Mm-hmm. So it was high status people. Now, was there competition of any kind? If you started your own paper company, could you really compete with someone that was allowed to not pay taxes for 7 years and had the entire government as a client?
No.
Not really. It was not fair at all, right? Like Santiago was saying, they own 100% of the market. So there is really no incentive to compete with them. Similarly, would you say, from what I read about agriculture and about bandidos and all that stuff and insecurity, would you say there are people available who are like, yes, I'm looking for a job, I'll work for this capitalist? Or were they busy doing other things like defending themselves from bandits and Indian rebels? Anyone? Nothing? Hello? Bueller? Is anyone here? Diana, you're talking?
They were busy defending themselves.
Yeah, basically. Now, the issue here is, does this picture of a society where we have a few privileged industrial capitalists and a lot of people, regular people, being left to their own devices to deal with insecurity and poverty, does that sound familiar? I hear it. The wind is louder than your participation. Does it sound familiar?
Yes.
Yes. Now, the thing is, if this sounds familiar, and this is not capitalism, because we know capitalism involves competition and it involves people being free to choose their own job, regardless of social status, right? To what extent is Mexico capitalist and going through the Industrial Revolution at the same time that other countries are?
How was the question again? How is Mexico what?
If what I just described is clearly not capitalism or industrialization, because it's a society where we can see a few privileged people taking advantage of industrial capitalism and a lot of people being left to their own devices and still sticking to a social status. To what extent is Mexico going through capitalism and the Industrial Revolution at the same time as other countries?
They are not that,
They're not? Why not?
because it's not for everyone. Like
Now,
only a few people
does capitalism have to be for everyone? Would you say everyone benefits from capitalism? Santiago says Mexico started capitalism about 100 years afterwards. Not 100 years, but about 50 years afterwards, yes. Anyone know what time in our history I'm talking about? Porfiriato, correct. Thank you, Santiago. Right? Now, we're not going to talk about Porfirio Diaz right now because there is no time. We're going to leave that for Colegio Alemán next week. But the issue is, it's a very common discussion topic to say that Porfirio Diaz brought capitalism and technology to Mexico, right? That he brought economic growth. However, that's kind of like saying that Enrique Peña Nieto brought Snapchat to Mexico, right? Did he bring it, or was it gonna arrive at some point because that's how technology works?
That's how technology works.
So the issue is, yes, around Porfirio Diaz's presidency, capitalism actually took place in Mexico, and a lot of the authoritarian episodes we attribute to Porfirio Diaz have to do with implementing capitalism and industrialization, but it's an entire discussion, right? Because now we talked about the issue, how conservatism came into what Mexico is. Then we talked about how liberalism entered into what Mexico is. Now we are trying to figure out how industrialization came into what Mexico is, because would you say Mexico has an industrial economy right now? Did we actually go through the Industrial Revolution? The fact that we are talking in a conference call should give you a hint. The fact that you are in a university called Tecnológico de Monterrey should give you a hint.
Yes, we have an
Technically, yes.
Yes, of course. And the Industrial Revolution happened. We're living its consequences. But when did it happen? That is the question we leave for next class. Any questions? Nothing? Great. By the way, did everyone that is going to use a computer next week, did you send me your MAC addresses? It's from your group. Let's see. I have Eduardo, Ana, Teresita, Elisa, Alejandra, Javier, Diana, Elias, and Sabina. Did someone send me their MAC address and I didn't mention them right now?
Can we still send it to you?
Yes, of course. Yeah, before midnight. Okay?
Well, then what?
Before midnight.
What?
Before midnight.
No, I heard that, but what do we send?
Oh, the MAC address. I'm sorry.
Yes, that's what I didn't hear.
Okay. Okay, so if there are no questions, I'll see you on Monday, probably. Bye.